Welcome to today's webinar
on From Complexity to Clarity, Structuring Technical Content That Works. This is Sheba and I'll be your co-host for tonight. Now I am delighted to introduce our speaker Abhinav Shekhar, Senior Technical Writer at Siemens. With over 7 years of experience in domains like semiconductors, 3D modeling, and oil and gas, he is passionate about elevating the craft of technical writing through creativity, structure, and community driven knowledge sharing. And today, Abhinav will share practical frameworks and real world examples to help you design documentation that delivers clarity and confidence to your readers. With that, I'll hand it over to Abhinav. The stage is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. So thank you for the introduction as well. So as mentioned, my name is Abhinav and working with Siemens as a senior technical writer. It's been close to 7 years I am in this field and I'm really enjoying this. And I experience over multiple domains that include semiconductors, 3D modeling softwares, software documentation, oil and gas, fire and safety. So it's a mixed kind of domain that I have worked in. And today's session that I'm focusing on is converting the complex information to the clear and concise information. That is what the session is about today. So in this session, I'll be walking you through various techniques to convert the complex inputs that is given by the SMEs to the user-friendly information that goes to the audience. That is what the main topic for the webinar is. We'll quickly go through the agenda. Agenda is quite clear. We'll start with why we need a structure in writing. That is what we'll start with. That why we need structure, and then we will start. Then we will continue with the audience analysis, like how to know user perspective and why it is important. Next, we will move towards how to convert messy inputs into organized outputs. This will be our main focus area for the webinar, and we will see some examples on this. Next, we will see information architecture principles. So when I say information architecture, it is structuring the content into useful and navigating pathway. Then we will see the importance of consistency in documentation, how it plays a major role in building a trust in the documentation. Then we will see what is the difference between over structuring and under structuring and how to spot a balanced content. And lastly, we will see some examples of a good structured and a poorly structured document. So we will be revolving around these points in this webinar. So we'll start with the basics of technical writing. What makes a document a good document? This is a very generic topic, and I hope the technical writers in this session might be knowing through this. So it should be clear. The document should be clear. It should be accurate. It should give the correct information. It should be structured. It should be consistent, and it should be accessible. So the components of a good document revolves around these points. And out of these points, we are going to cover this point, that how a structured document makes a document stand out. That is what we are going to focus on this webinar. So we'll start with why structure is needed. So have you gone through some messy rooms? You do not feel like entering a messy rooms. It's just like, okay, this room is messy. I don't want to enter. Let's move to some other room. So similarly, messy documents. It goes same with the messy documents. If the document is messy, nobody wants to enter a document. Nobody wants to read the document. So messy documentation is like messy rooms. Nobody wants to enter. So that is why structure is. Your document should be organized. It should not be messy. That is the very first impression. So we'll go back to the previous slide. So if your documentation is clear, if it is correct, if it is consistent, but the documentation is messy, it is a turn off point kind of thing for the users. They will not enter the document. They will not like to read the documentation. So a well-structured documentation is a welcome documentation. It welcomes the audiences to read the documentation. That is the very first point that user. So why structure is needed? It helps in navigation. So when I say navigation, it tells the user, okay, this is the main point, this is the subheading, this is the third level heading. So it helps to navigate in the documentation. It enhances user experience. So when there is a document that is well structured, it enhances the user experience. The user experience is a very good while that is coming out of the documentation, so it aids contents reuse. So if the documentation is structured, we can reuse that documents. So it is known as modular documentation, whereas we are dividing our documentation into small chunks. And if it is divided into small chunks, we can reuse those small chunks for some other documents. For example, we have a user manual. And in that user manual, we have a section called prerequisite. And prerequisite, and then we are developing a manual. For, let's example, we say we are developing an installation manual for the same product. So that prerequisite content can be reused from the user manual to the installation manual. Why? Because that content is structured. So it helps in content reuse and it enhances scalability. So for example, if we have one documentation and the revision is, let's say, version 1, and now we are moving to version 2. So if we have a defined structure, that scalability becomes very easy. We know where to use the content. We know where to edit the content. We know from where we need to remove the content, and we know from where we need to add the content. So it enhances the scalability. So these are the four major points that plays a very important role in deciding why structure is needed in the documentation. Moving to the next agenda, that is why user perspective is important. Writing without knowing the user is a Maggie without water. It is dry and useless. So if you are writing, if you do not know for whom you are writing, it doesn't make any sense to write the documentation because you will not know for whom we are writing, what is their experience level, what is their knowledge level, what they want from the documentation. So you should know what the user is asking for. So you should know your user. If you do not know your user, then that documentation is useless. So why we need user perspective? It helps to decide the output, tone, and style. As I mentioned, if for the user, we can decide the tone. If it is a novice user, we can use less jargons, we can use simpler language. And if it is for experienced users, we can sprinkle some amount of jargons. We can use some complex terms based on their experience level. So it helps to decide the tone of the documentation. It sets a connection between documentation and user. So if we know the user, definitely our documentation will be customized according to them. So it will set a connection between the user and the document. It helps to optimize the content. So if we know the user, for example, if we know the user who is going to use the documentation back to in print media, then putting a video in the document doesn't make any sense. So we should know who is going to use the document. What will be the media of the document? Is it going to be a print media? Is it going to be the web media? And based on that, we can put the content. And when we know the user perspective, it helps to set the information hierarchy. Like I mentioned, if the user is novice, if it is a new user, we can decide the hierarchy. When I say hierarchy, I mean the heading levels. So according to the user, we can decide the heading levels. And if it is an experienced user, that will change for the experience of the user. So these are the factors that play an important role in deciding the documentation based on the user perspective. Now, how to convert a messy input into organized output? So all the technicals out there, you might be familiar with this phenomenon wherein we get all the inputs in form of that is completely mess. Is it a Word document? Sometimes it comes as a form of Excel. Sometimes it comes as a form of email chains that we have to go through, multiple PDFs, sometimes videos also. So it's a messy input. It's a lot of input that we get, and then we as a technical writer we have to organize the entire mess into something which is useful and organized for the user. So how to do that? That is what the main role of technical writer is. We are not supposed to edit the grammar or edit the punctuation. That is something that is the basic need of a technical writer. Our main job is to convert those messy inputs into something which is helpful for the user. We are here to help the users. We're not here to confuse the users. So this is the story of a technical writer. My draft starts with chaos and ends with a clarity. That is what we do on a day-to-day basis. If you see the image over here, this is what the before is. This is what we get as an input. And upon a lot of research, a lot of tweaking, a lot of editing, a lot of rewriting, a lot of reviews, we come up with the clean instructions. So it is not like editing the PDF that we do on a day-to-day basis. We are the one who are acting as a voice of customer and helping them to get out of problem wherein they get stuck while using a product. So this is what the entire journey of a technical writer is. From this to a meaningful output. So we'll explore one by one how to convert this messy input into organized outputs. So this is a step-by-step kind of approach that I have adopted. So we'll go one by one. So first is understanding the documentation goal. So when I say documentation goal, it means understanding the audience. What is the goal of the documentation? Is it going to be the installation guide? Are we helping the user to install a particular product? Are we helping the user to maintain a product? Are we helping the user to do a certain activity that he has to do by following that documentation? So the very first step is to understand the documentation goal. What is the intention of the document? So once we have understood the goal of the documentation, next we need to gather and examine the inputs. So gathering and examining inputs, like I mentioned, inputs can be in any form. It can be a PDF, it can be a Word document, it can be an Excel document, it can be an email trail. Sometimes I have received inputs in the form of video wherein I was told, okay, this is what we are installing. We do not have any text for that, but we have recorded the entire process. Please go through the video and then help us to write the entire procedure. So sometimes it can be in the form of video also. And I think these are the general form of inputs that we receive. So the second step is gathering and examining all the inputs. So the third step is reaching out to SME for any missing input. So we might come across a scenario wherein we are gathering the inputs and then we have examined all the inputs and we came to know, okay, this is something which is missing in the document. I need some additional information about this document, or I need some additional information in order to write the documentation. So next step is to reach out to subject matter expert for that missing info. Before I go to the next step, I want to lay emphasis on this step. So why this step is important? Because once we have examined all the inputs and then we start writing the document, and then later we came to know, okay, this is something which is missing, and then we again go back to SME. During this time, a lot of things might change, or the SME get engaged in some other activity. So it's better to ask as many questions as you have before starting the writing task. Because once we start the writing task, we cannot go back and change the entire draft. So collect as much information as you can before writing the documentation. That will help a lot. That will save a lot of time. That will save a lot of effort from your end and from the SME's end. Now moving to the next step, that is organize the chaos. So once we have gathered all the inputs, once we have received all the information from the subject matter expert, next step is cutting down the things that is not needed. Sometimes what happens, SMEs will dump all the information that is sometimes not required. So we need to organize all the inputs. So it's a pile of input that we receive, and then we need to cut short and filter out, okay, this is something which I need, and this is something which I do not need. So what I follow is I basically create a folder wherein I say input, and then I'll create another folder wherein I'll say, okay, input which is not required in output, or I'll say input not required, something like that. I will create two folders. So the input folder will have the actual input that is required for a document, and the other folder will have all the noise that is not required. That is a distraction that is not required in the output. So that is what the organize the chaos step is. You need to figure out, okay, this is what I need in the documentation. This is what is going to help me to create the document, and then this is not required. So that organization is very much important before writing the document. Next step is we need to translate the jargons. So SMEs will come up with a lot of jargons. So we need to translate all the jargons. Okay, this is the meaning of this particular jargon. So you need to translate all the jargon. Next is structure for clarity. Then we need to structure the entire document. Okay, this will be the heading one, this will be the heading two. Okay, heading one will have three subheadings, heading two will have two subheadings, something like that. We need to structure the document based on the documentation goal. And then once we have structured it, we need to create the document. So creation plus structure is the same step that I have mentioned. So once we have structured, we need to create the document, and then we need to test and wait. So once we have written the entire document, we need to test it. Okay, is it going in the right direction? Is it something which was the documentation goal, and or is it something which is actually helping the user? This is what test and validate step is. The last step is deliver. So you put the document in some SharePoint, or you upload a documentation some CMS portal. So that is what the delivery phase is. So we'll go one by one. We'll have some examples in each of the steps, and we will see how to convert the messy inputs into structured output. This is a high level information that I have mentioned in this slide. Next slides will point on each steps, and we'll have some examples in next slides, and then we'll see how each step proceeds further. So technical writing research is a detective work. So we technical writers are no less than detectives. We will spot the clues, solve the jargons, and crack the clarity. So it's a kind of detective job wherein we will see, okay, this is missing. So we need to reach out to SME. Okay, this is not required. Let's clean it. So this is what technical writers main kind of roles is. Okay, understanding the goal. So what I have done is, these are my points, and then I explained each of the points in the coming slides. So understanding the documentation goal. So we have to ask, who is the audience for whom I'm writing? Is it a expert audience? Is it for someone who is very initial? You need to identify the purpose of the documentation, what the documentation is going to solve. Check the context. What is the context of the documentation? Talk to stakeholders. So talking to stakeholders is basically I find the purpose, taking the context. To stakeholders is important because sometimes what happens, we tend to assume something, and then we talk to stakeholders, we go, okay, this was my wrong assumptions. This is something which is actual demand of the documentation. And this is what works for me every time. Review existing documentation. So if your organization has existing document, it's highly recommended to go through the document to understand, okay, this is the flow, this is what we are writing, this is how we are writing, this is where we are placing the images, this is where we are placing the graphs here, this is how the tables are laid out. So this is a very recommended kind of exercise that I will suggest, because this will make your work very very easy, because once you have the blueprint, it becomes very easy to modify it. It becomes very easy to follow that as well. So if you want to make some tweaks in that existing documents, it's well and good. Or if you have some style guide that is being followed, you can take it from there. Next is gather and examine the inputs. So like I mentioned, collect all the data, notes, snippets, conversations, screenshots, user feedback. Ask yourself, what is the problem? What problem is input trying to solve for the user? What is the goal of it? Why SMEs have given this input to me? Next is reach out to SME for any missing information. So you need to clarify all anything that is conflicting, and please don't hesitate to ask SMEs about any question that comes to your mind. Do not assume anything. Set up a meeting if required. Like I mentioned, do not assume. And I have kept it in bold or caps. Why? Because many a times we assume few things. Okay, what will the SME think if I ask this foolish question to them? And then we assume something, and then we start writing. And later in the review phase, we come to know, okay, this is something which is my wrong assumption. The entire process starts from the zero again. So whatever doubts you have, it's better to clarify in the beginning and not assume anything. Assumption kills the clarity in the documentation. So do not assume anything before starting the documentation. Organizing the chaos, sort information by category, features, steps, error, FAQs, etc. So your inputs will be having some steps. Your inputs will have some error messages. So sort based on the noise, filter out irrelevant details, internal jokes, repeated information, developer shortcuts. So sometimes what happens, long email chain goes in, and then SMEs keep on discussing something which is of no use to the writer. So that is something that is a noise for us. Sometimes an information is repeated multiple times. That is also a noise for us. And some shortcuts that developers use. That is also a noise for us because that is not going to help the user perspective. So we need to keep only that information that is helping the end user to achieve their task. The rest everything is noise. Next is translate jargons. An example: SME says API throws 404 when payload schema mismatches. This is something which is an input, but this input is of no use to the end user. How we will be converting this to the voice of the end user? If the request format is incorrect, the system shows not found error. So this 404 is basically not found. So users might not know what 404 is. So we need to convert this 404 into something which is meaningful to the user. So this is what the jargon says. You need to translate each and every complex information that is there in the input to something which is simpler and that is helping the user. Explain all the technical terms only when necessary. So sometimes what happens, acronyms and all, we keep on explaining a single acronyms multiple times, whereas not required. One-time explanation is required. Later we can use that. So that is what we are following. So keep this in mind. Next is structure for clarity. Use a consistent format. For example, overview, requisite, steps, result, troubleshooting. So based on the documentation goal, we can use a consistent format. Break down steps into numbered list. So if we have a paragraph of steps, there is no point of putting that paragraph into the document because that will overwhelm the user. So it's better to break down those steps into sub steps into numbered lists. As add visual aids, for example, we use diagrams, screenshot, code snippets. So these are all kind of helpful tools to help the clarity. Test and validate. So try run the process yourself. Does it work as written? So is it working as written in the document? We need to test it. I understand sometimes what happens is that we are not in a position to access the end product. Sometimes what happens, the software we are documenting is not accessible to technical writers, and that is the maximum scenario. But in some cases, we have the access to the product. So if you have the access, it's recommended to do the usability testing to see whatever we have written is actually working as per that. And if we do not have the access to the product, then we can do the flow test. Okay, is it going with the flow? If this screenshot is coming before a particular screenshot, and if we see any confusion in that, then we can change that. So that comes with the usability testing. Peer review, get feedback from subject matter expert and a non-technical user if possible. So generally, what happens in an organization, we go for the peer review wherein we write the documentation and then we go for the self review and then we send the document to our peer to do the peer review and then we send it to the subject matter expert. So that is what the feedback mechanism is. So get this feedback mechanism and if possible pass the document to some non-technical user to get a different perspective about the documentation. And next is revise. So we need to polish the wording, tighten the sentences, and simplify as much as we can. If we go through one document multiple times, I think every time we will come up with something which can be polished. So it's recommended to go through the documentation by taking certain amount of break. What I follow is that I will write the initial draft. I will take a break of 10-15 minutes. I'll come back again with a fresh perspective. I will go through the documentation once again, and then I will come up with something, and I will come up with a polished version of the documentation. So this is what revising is. And last is deliver. So this is what the tricky part is. So fingers crossed, may the reviewer be kind enough and comments be few. So once we deliver a document and somebody sees it, chances are there that you will get the review comments. We cannot eliminate the review comments, but we can hope for the best. We can reduce the review comments. Okay, so this was about how to convert messy inputs into structured output. It's a long step, it's a long journey, I would say, wherein take back to the slide. Okay. It's a long journey wherein majority of the work of a technical writer comes into picture. People say, okay, technical writer's job is to write a document. That's it. We edit the PDF, we send it for review, or we just publish it. But this is what the entire journey of a technical writer is. This is what we go through. and sometimes it takes a lot of time to go through the entire process. But this can be reduced. This can be reduced to an extent if you have the clarity about documentation goal, if you have right answers to the questions that you have asked to SMEs, the time can be reduced if you have organized all the inputs in a proper way. So this is what the entire journey is. And there, with that, I will move to the next topic that I have, that is information architecture principles. So when I say information architecture, it simply means how do we decide which part of content will be located where in my document. So what is the job of an architect is? An architect creates a beautiful layout of a house or a building, and it optimizes the space in the entire floor plan. So when it comes to information architecture, it is same. So we are the architect of the information. We decide where to put the information so that it creates maximum impact on the user. So that is what the information architecture is. How do you set the chunk of your document in the document, chunk of your text in the document so that the users are benefited from it? So there are certain principles that information architecture follows. The first one is principle of organization. So principle of organization says that your text or your content should follow a proper hierarchy. It should contain it should contain a proper sequence, and it should be properly categorized. So in short, we can say the content should be organized in certain pattern. For example, heading 1, heading 2, heading 3. So this is what the principle of organization is. Next is the principle of labeling. Principle of labeling says use clear, consistent, and user-friendly terms and avoid the jargons. So this is what the principle of labeling is. Your content should be user friendly. It should not use a user. Next is the principle of disclosure. Principle of disclosure is you should not overwhelm the user. So for example, if you have a lot of information in the documentation and you put all the information in a single screen or you put all the information in a single page, what will happen? The users will get overwhelmed. Okay, this is something which is a lot of information. I should go away. I should run away from this document. So principle of disclosure is show whatever is required and then remove the content which is not required. This is what the principle of disclosure is. Do not overwhelm the users. Now there might be a question saying that okay, you have a lot of document, you have a lot of information in the document, and all the information should go in the document. There is nothing we can remove. How to tackle that situation? So in that case, what we can do is we can keep the information that is relevant, and then we can create a hyperlink saying that okay, if you want more information about this, click on this link or click or go to some section. If it is a web based documentation, you can give a hyperlink saying okay, click on the link to get more information about this document or about this topic. If it is a print media, you can create a separate section for that and you can direct the user okay, refer to section 3.2 for the detailed information, something like that, so that users are not overwhelmed with the information. That is what the principle of disclosure is. Next is the principle of consistency. So use consistent terms in the documentation, use consistent formatting in the documentation. So for example, if we are writing a document and at some point of time we are mentioning click on the radio button and then later we are mentioning click on the button, this might confuse the user. So keep the terms consistent. Stick to radio button or stick to round button. So we need to be consistent in the documentation. Next is principle of flexibility. So principle of flexibility is basically giving the users freedom to use multiple ways to execute a task. I will give a small example over here. In order to save a file, we can either go with the file menu and then click on save, or we can go with the control plus S shortcut. So principle of flexibility says that you should tell the user all the methods that are there to execute a particular task. They can follow the another method. That is principle of as we have for executing a particular task. And next is the principle of context. So information should make sense in the environment. I'll give an example over here. For example, if you're writing an error message that says error, this task cannot be executed. That's all. What will be the, the impression of the user over here? The users might get confused. Okay, this error is there, that thing, and the task cannot be executed. So what next? How can I rectify this? So the message should have a proper context. Okay, this is the reason of the error, and this is how you can correct it. So this is what the principle of context is. Okay, now moving to the next topic that we have for the webinar is importance of consistency. I have two images on the screen, and that image is of Starbucks cafe. One is A and one is B. And let's imagine a scenario wherein we are planning to go to Starbucks. We come across two stores side by side, and then we decide to enter. Which one will you select? Is it A or is it B? I think most of you will enter the A one, this image on the left hand side, because the reason is we have seen the Starbucks with this logo. We have seen the Starbucks with this logo. We have not seen the Starbucks with this. So what is happening? This logo is inconsistent, and this is resulting in trust issue. So this is what the importance of consistency is. So if you're not maintaining the consistency, it leads to trust issue. We'll see a lot of we will see importance of consistency in this side as well. So we'll start with the readability part. So it improves the readability. So when I say readability, so if your document is consistent, if it is following a particular pattern, if it is following a particular tone, automatically the readability of the document enhances. For example, you are mentioning, okay, heading 1, heading 2, heading 3, and then this is what you are following in the entire document. And suddenly heading 4 comes into picture or heading 5 comes into picture. It will give a shock to the user. So maintain a particular pattern in the document. If you are using bullet points that is in round shape, keep it round. Do not make it tick mark or do not make it star kind of thing. Do not keep changing the elements in the documentation, because it reduces the readability. It enhances the user trust. As mentioned in the previous slide, it leads to the trust issues. So if your documentation is not consistent, it will lead to the trust issues in the users. So it gives an impression, okay, this is something which is unprofessional. This cannot be relied upon. So consistency leads to trust. So this is what consistency is, plays an important role here. It supports findability. So whenever we come across a document, we do not go line by line. We scan the document. So we'll go through the heading one. Generally, what we follow as a practice, or we have a habit of reading the headings first, and then we read the subheadings. Nobody is going to read line by line in first 5-10 seconds. Everybody is going to read the heading. Everybody is going to see the image. Everybody is going to read the bullet points. So if your document is well structured, if your document is following a proper consistency, it will help in findability of the document. It simplifies the maintenance. So when I say maintenance, I'll give an example. For example, if you are using multiple terms in a single document and later you need to update all the terms, so that becomes a very difficult task to do. For example, if you want to replace all the radio button terms in a document, it becomes very easy to do Control F and Control H, the replace kind of thing in Word document. But if you are using multiple terms for the same, it becomes very difficult to maintain that. So it simplifies maintenance. If a document is consistent, the maintenance part becomes very easy and it speeds up learning. So if your document is following a proper flow, if your document is consistent, users will get to know, okay, this is what the pattern is, and the next page or the next screen will follow the same pattern. So the learning curve is very much smooth in case of a consistent document. So this is what a consistent document plays a very important role in deciding whether the user will go through the entire document or they will simply drop off in the middle of the documentation or in the middle of the journey. Okay, so I will go back to the agenda first. We'll see what we have covered and then we can take it from there. Okay. So we have started with the basic need of documentation. We saw why we need a structure in writing. We saw why knowing the audience is very important. We stressed upon how to convert message inputs into organized outputs. We have gone through information architecture principles. We have gone through the importance of a consistent document or maintaining consistency document. Now, how do we decide? How do we spot a document that is overstructured or that is understructured? We might come to a scenario, okay, wherein we will say, okay, we need to follow a structure, and then I will make the document structured. And sometimes we get lost. Okay, we'll make the document overstructured. So we'll see how to spot a documentation which is understructured. We will also see how to spot a document that is overstructured, and then how to maintain a balance between two with the example of a good structure and bad structure. Okay, so yes, yeah. So I have an instruction on the screen which says how to reset a Wi-Fi router, and we have all the required information to perform the task. So this piece of content is accurate. This can be clear to some users, and it is fulfilling the task that this document is intended to do. This document is intended to educate the user how to reset a Wi-Fi router. So basic task, there's simple tasks that this document has to perform. This document is accurate, but the impression that the very first information that the user gets with this piece of document is, okay, this is a boring kind of information that is put in front of me. It's a kind of novel that I have go through, and we will go through all the lengthy paragraphs and all. Let's skip this. Right. So let's see under which category this document falls in. This document is hard scan. There is no clear step. Everything looks same. This looks same. This looks same. Everything, the entire document looks same. You cannot scan it. There is no heading. There is no subheading. Nothing is there. You cannot you cannot read line by line. There is no clear step that what I'm supposed to do first and what I'm supposed to do second step. So this is an example of understructured document. This is a pure example of understructured. Okay, here is another example. Same scenario, same set of tasks. How to reset a Wi-Fi, and I see some sort of structure is there. And for me, it is easy to scan through the document because I have some headings, subheadings like there. But I feel a lot of work that I need to do. Let's see under which category this document. There are too many headings in this, and readers will lose the flow. As I mentioned, it is overwhelming. Users will get an impression, okay, I have to do a lot of work to the Wi-Fi router. So it is an overwhelming kind of feeling that the user will get from this document. So this is an example of over-structured document. Okay, so what is the solution? We have seen under-structured document and we have seen over-structured document. What is the solution? Sometimes what happens, okay, we might get influenced with the information architecture that we will end up in over-structuring a document. So what is the solution? So the solution is balancing. And how do you balance it? We have some rules over here. The first is 2-5 rule, which says add a heading every 2 to 5 paragraphs. This depends. This is not a thumb rule, I will say. This will totally change based on the end user. So that is why user audience analysis is very important in documenting any piece of text. So this is what is recommended. You should add a heading every 2 to 5 paragraphs. Step versus bullets. Number only when order matters. So there are two things. There are steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and there are bullets. When we have separate bullets. So we can use steps like 1, 3, 4, wherein we need to perform some sort of tasks, or when some order is required. For that we can use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Rest we can use bullets. No orphan headings. So do not make headings for one line. So if you have a text of one line, I don't think it makes any sense to add a heading to that. The solution to this is to adjust that particular text in some sort of heading and adjust it with some existing heading. There is no need to create a separate heading for one line or two lines. Chunk smartly, 3 to 6 lines per chunk. So when I say chunk, I mean paragraphs. So 3 to 6 lines a paragraph is a decent, has a decent readability. So we need to chunk the content in such a manner that it is organized in the document, and then do a scan test. Read only headings, bullets, and if it flows, the balance is good. So if you're able to read all the headings, if you're if you're able to read all the bullets, and if the flow is good, I think the balance is good. It all depends on you. You have to test it. Like I mentioned, that you need to do the usability testing before. So that is what scan test is. And once you have done all the formatting, all the structure, go through the documentation and ask yourself a question. Can user find the answer quickly without skimming the endless text? So ask yourself, act yourself as a user and say, okay, this is what I'm looking for in this document, and am I getting that answer? If the answer is yes, there you go. You have maintained a proper balance in the documentation. So this is what will help you in balancing the structure in your document. Okay, now coming to a balanced document. So we have gone through the structured version of this. We've also gone through the unstructured version of this. Now we have the balanced version of the same piece of content. So it says how to reset your Wi-Fi router. Look at the reset button. I can see, okay, I need to press and hold. Okay, I need to wait. I need to log in. I need to reconnect. So what I am scanning is I am scanning the bold part. I'm scanning the headings. I'm not reading the single line text and all. I'm not reading that. So I'm getting a feeling. Okay, this is a very easy task. It will take a lot. It will take very less time for me to perform this action. So this is what a balanced document looks like. So this document is easy to scan, simple steps, and clear is and the flow is clear. So it's simply looking like a wall. This is what the balance is. I hope with this example it will be clear to differentiate or to spot an under-structured document, an over-structured document, and a balanced document. Okay, now I think this is the last slide, I guess. So structure is the GPS of writing. Without it, readers quickly lose the direction. So we as a writer, our job as a writer is to act as a GPS, is to help the user navigate through the endless text. As you know, in today's era, nobody wants to go through the long text. Nobody wants to go through the heavy documentation. So it's our role as a documentation manager or a technical writer to structure a document in such a way that the users are not overwhelmed. The document should look engaging and it should not take the user to some endless destination. So our job as a technical writer is to help the users to perform their intended task or the intended action that they are looking for in the documentation.
Thank you, Abhinav. The session was quite insightful, and I'm sure the audience will agree with me. And that's a wrap for today's session. A huge thanks to Abhinav for walking us through the topic. I hope the insights shared tonight gave everyone a clearer understanding of the role structure plays in creating documentation that supports users. To everyone who tuned in, thank you for taking your time to be here and for all your great questions and comments. And of course, if you have more questions or want to learn more about Document 360, then feel free to reach out to us. We'll be back soon with another session soon. Until then, see you next time. Thank you, Abhinav.